Darling, your mom blocked the account. My daughter-in-law screamed into the phone, her voice crackling with panic and rage. The words hit me like a slap across my weathered face. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I am 73 years old. I live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on Chicago's north side, where the L train rattles the windows every 15 minutes and the smell of fried onions from the Polish deli downstairs seeps through the floorboards. Every morning at 5:30, I wake to the sound of Lake Michigan's wind howling through the alley behind our building. My joints ache as I shuffle to the kitchen in my worn terry cloth robe, the one my late mother gave me 30 years ago. The fabric is thin now, threads pulling loose at the seams, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. It's one of the few things I have left that still feels like home. I make coffee in the same chipped ceramic mug I've used for decades. Richard, my husband of 47 years, sleeps until noon these days. His snores echo from the bedroom, mixing with the distant hum of morning traffic on Sheridan Road. The apartment feels smaller each day, cluttered with photo albums I rarely open anymore and medical bills stacked on the kitchen counter like accusations. The walls are painted a faded yellow that once seemed cheerful but now just looks tired, like everything else in our lives. For the past 8 years, I've been sending money to my son Michael and his wife Lauren. $2,000 a month, sometimes more when emergencies arose. And there were always emergencies. Their mortgage was behind. The kids needed school supplies. The car broke down. Lauren's mother needed surgery. Each request came wrapped in desperation and gratitude, phone calls that started with, "Mom, we hate to ask, but," and ended with promises to pay me back someday. I believed them every time. I wanted to believe them. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was sitting at my small dining table, sorting through bills with my reading glasses perched on the tip of my nose. The checkbook lay open beside me, its pages filled with my careful handwriting documenting years of sacrifice. Electric bill, $63. Groceries, $48. Transfer to Michael and Lauren, $2,000. The pattern repeated month after month, year after year, until the numbers blurred together into one endless stream of giving. My phone buzzed against the fake wood surface of the table. Lauren's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by her smiling photo from last Christmas. She looked radiant in that picture, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her teeth white and straight. I had paid for those teeth. The orthodontics for the kids, the dental work for her and Michael. I remembered feeling proud as I watched her pose for that photo, thinking how beautiful my family looked, how blessed we all were. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, trying to inject warmth into my voice despite the exhaustion that seemed to live in my bones these days. "Margaret, we have a problem." Her voice was sharp, clipped. No greeting, no asking how I was feeling. Just straight to the point, as always. "The transfer didn't go through this morning. The bank said the account was blocked." My throat tightened. I had indeed blocked the automatic transfer the night before, after discovering something that shattered what was left of my trust. But I wasn't ready to tell her that yet. I needed to understand what I had uncovered, needed to make sense of the paperwork I'd found hidden in Richard's desk drawer. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said carefully, buying time. "Don't play games with me, Margaret. We know you did something." Michael is furious. "The mortgage payment was due yesterday, and now we're in default because you decided to throw one of your tantrums." Tantrum. The word stung like alcohol on a fresh wound. When had my concerns become tantrums? When had my questions become unreasonable demands? I thought back to the last time I'd visited their house in Lincolnwood, how Lauren had rolled her eyes when I asked about the new kitchen appliances, the expensive patio furniture that appeared overnight. "I need to talk to Michael," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't want to talk to you right now. He's too upset." "You've really done it this time, Margaret. I hope you're happy." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my trembling hand, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settling over my shoulders like a heavy blanket. But underneath the guilt was something else, something I'd been trying to ignore for months. Anger. Pure, burning anger that made my chest tight and my hands shake. I walked to Richard's desk, my slippers making soft brushing sounds against the worn carpet. The drawer stuck as I pulled it open, wood scraping against wood in protest. Inside, buried beneath old tax documents and warranty papers, were the bank statements I discovered the night before. Statements for an account I never knew existed, an account that showed regular deposits from our joint savings. My money. Our money. Being funneled into investments I'd never approved, luxury purchases I'd never seen. The pages trembled in my hands as I read through them again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the numbers didn't lie. While I ate generic cereal and shopped at thrift stores, while I skipped my arthritis medication to save money, while I lay awake at night worrying about our dwindling retirement fund, they were spending my contributions on a boat. a boat I'd never even seen. I thought about all the times Lauren had complimented my frugality, calling me smart with money and practical. All the times she'd praised my selflessness, my willingness to sacrifice for family. Had she been laughing at me the entire time? Had they been laughing together, counting my money while I counted pennies? The apartment felt suffocating suddenly. I needed air, needed space to think. I grabbed my coat from the closet, a brown wool thing I'd owned for 15 years, and headed for the door. The hallway smelled like old cooking grease and industrial cleaner, familiar scents that usually comforted me but now made my stomach turn. Outside, Chicago's October wind bit at my cheeks and made my eyes water. Or maybe that was the tears I'd been holding back finally breaking free. I walked toward the lake, my destination unclear but my need for movement urgent. The sidewalks were cracked and uneven, forcing me to watch my step carefully. I passed the same shop windows I'd looked at for years, the same bus stops where I'd waited countless times, but everything looked different now. Sharper somehow. More real. Lake Michigan stretched endlessly before me, its surface choppy and gray under the overcast sky. I found a bench facing the water and sat down heavily, my purse clutched tight in my lap. The leather was cracked and faded, another relic from better times. Inside were my pill bottles, my reading glasses, my wallet with its few remaining credit cards. Everything that remained of my independence. I thought about the early years of my marriage to Richard, when we were young and hopeful and stupid enough to think love would be enough. He worked construction then, his hands rough and strong from handling tools and materials. I worked part-time at a doctor's office, typing letters and filing insurance claims. We lived in a tiny apartment not far from where I sit now, dreaming of the house we'd buy someday, the children we'd raise together. Michael came along when I was 26, a beautiful baby with Richard's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. I remember the overwhelming love I felt the first time I held him, how it seemed impossible that anything could be more important than protecting this tiny person. I quit my job to stay home with him, stretching Richard's paycheck to cover rent and groceries and all the endless expenses that come with a new baby. Those were hard years, but they were good years too. I made Michael's baby food from scratch, sewing his clothes from scraps of fabric I found on sale. Richard would come home covered in dust and exhaustion, but he'd always smile when he saw his son. We were building something together, something that felt permanent and meaningful. When Michael started school, I went back to work. Office jobs mostly, answering phones and organizing files for small companies that couldn't afford full-time staff. The money wasn't much, but every dollar mattered. We saved for Michael's college fund, putting away $20 or $30 a month when we could manage it. We saved for the house we still dreamed of owning, for the car that would replace our aging Chevrolet, for all the things we thought we needed to be happy. Michael was a good student, quiet and serious like his father. He played baseball in Little League and learned piano from an elderly woman in our neighborhood who charged $5 a lesson. I was so proud of him, so sure he would grow up to do important things. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about that little boy, trying to reconcile him with the man who calls me now only when he needs money. He met Lauren in college, a business major with big ambitions and expensive tastes. I remember the first time he brought her home, how nervous he was, how eager for our approval. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Tall and confident, with the kind of smile that could sell ice to penguins. She talked about their plans for the future, their dreams of success and wealth, their certainty that they would have everything they wanted. "We're going to buy a big house someday," she told me over dinner, her hand resting possessively on Michael's arm. "With a pool and a 3-car garage. Michael's going to be so successful in business, aren't you, honey?" Michael beamed at her words, and I felt a flutter of unease in my stomach. Not because I didn't want him to succeed, but because success seemed to be the only thing that mattered to her. Not kindness or integrity or the simple pleasure of building a life together. Just success, measured in dollars and possessions and the envy of others. They married 2 years after graduation, a wedding that cost more than Richard and I made in 6 months. We took out a loan to help pay for it, telling ourselves it was an investment in Michael's happiness. Lauren's parents contributed too, but somehow it was never enough. There were always extras, upgrades, additions to the guest list that no one had budgeted for. I remember standing in the church that day, watching my son promise to love and honor this woman who seemed so foreign to me. She looked like a princess in her $1,000 dress, but there was something cold in her eyes, something calculating that made me shiver despite the June heat. The early years of their marriage brought a steady stream of requests for help. A down payment on their first house, money for furniture, loans for car payments when Michael's entry-level job didn't cover their expenses. Each time, they promised it was temporary, just until they got established, just until Michael's career took off. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. They were family, and family helps each other through difficult times. That's what my mother had taught me, what her mother had taught her. You take care of your own, no matter what it costs you. So I took extra shifts at the office, working nights and weekends to increase my paycheck. I canceled my subscription to the one magazine I enjoyed, stopped buying the good coffee I loved, wore my shoes until the soles were thin as paper. Every sacrifice felt worthwhile when I thought about Michael and Lauren building their life together, when I imagined the grandchildren who would someday run through their backyard. Those grandchildren came eventually. Emma first, then 2 years later, little Jake. I fell in love with them instantly, completely, the way grandmothers always do. Emma had Michael's serious expression but Lauren's bright blue eyes. Jake was pure energy from the moment he could crawl, getting into everything and laughing at his own mischief. I thought having children would change Lauren, would soften her edges and help her understand what really mattered in life. Instead, it seemed to make her more demanding, more convinced that she deserved the best of everything. Designer clothes for the babies, the most expensive daycare in the neighborhood, a bigger house to accommodate their growing family. The children deserve nice things, she would say whenever I questioned an expense. We don't want them to feel deprived like we were. Were we deprived? I wondered about that sometimes. Richard and I had never owned new furniture or taken expensive vacations, but we'd been happy. We'd had each other, had Michael, had the simple pleasures of Sunday dinners and backyard barbecues with neighbors who became friends. When had that stopped being enough? The requests for money became more frequent after the children were born. Mortgage payments, car repairs, medical bills that insurance didn't cover. Each call started the same way, with Lauren's voice bright and cheerful, asking about my health and telling me cute stories about what the kids had done that week. Then, gradually, the tone would shift. I hate to ask, Mom, but we're in a tight spot this month. Mom. She'd started calling me that after Emma was born, and I'd been so pleased. I thought it meant she truly considered me family, that the distance I'd always felt between us was finally closing. Now I wonder if it was just another form of manipulation, a way to make her request sound more personal, more legitimate. The pattern continued for years. I would receive a call, hear about their latest crisis, write a check, and feel a mixture of pride and worry as I sealed the envelope. Pride that I was able to help, worry about what would happen when I couldn't anymore. Richard never questioned it, never asked why our savings account seemed to shrink instead of grow despite our careful budgeting. Family comes first, he would say whenever I expressed concern. We'll figure it out. But we weren't figuring it out. We were just postponing the inevitable, using our limited resources to fund a lifestyle we could never afford ourselves. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake at night calculating and recalculating our finances, trying to find ways to make the numbers work. I took on freelance typing jobs, working at home in the evenings to earn extra money. My arthritic fingers cramped as I hunched over the keyboard, but I pushed through the pain. Every dollar mattered. Every dollar might be the one that kept Michael and Lauren afloat for another month. The physical toll was exhausting, but the emotional toll was worse. I felt like I was living two different lives. During the day, I was Margaret, the generous mother-in-law, the selfless grandmother who would do anything for her family. At night, I was Margaret, the woman who ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and worried about how she would pay for her heart medication. I started avoiding social situations, declining invitations from the few friends I had left. I couldn't afford to go out to lunch or contribute to group gifts. I couldn't bear to listen to other women talk about their grandchildren's activities when I couldn't afford to take Emma and Jake anywhere special. My world became smaller and smaller, reduced to work and worry and the endless cycle of giving. The isolation was the hardest part. Richard worked long hours and came home tired, uninterested in conversation. Michael and Lauren called only when they needed something. My own siblings lived far away and had their own problems to deal with. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible even to myself. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in store windows and be surprised by what I saw. An old woman in cheap clothes, her shoulders permanently hunched, her expression perpetually worried. When had I become this person? When had I stopped mattering except as a source of money? The breaking point came on my 70th birthday. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, imagining a small celebration with Michael and Lauren and the children. Nothing fancy, just dinner at home and maybe a store-bought cake. I had even bought myself a new blouse for the occasion, the first new piece of clothing I'd purchased in over a year. The morning of my birthday, I cleaned the apartment until it sparkled. I made Michael's favorite pot roast and bought ice cream in all the flavors the children loved. I set the table with my good china, the wedding set my mother had given me that I rarely used anymore because I was afraid of breaking it. At 4 o'clock, an hour before they were supposed to arrive, the phone rang. "Hi Mom," Michael's voice sounded strained, uncomfortable. "Listen, we're not going to be able to make it tonight. Emma has a soccer tournament, and Lauren promised the other moms she'd help with the team party." I stood in my kitchen surrounded by the evidence of my preparations, the phone trembling in my hand. A soccer tournament that was more important than my birthday. A team party that couldn't happen without Lauren's contribution. Could we maybe do it tomorrow? I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. Tomorrow's not great either. Maybe next weekend? Next weekend came and went without a word. The pot roast went bad before I could finish eating it alone. The ice cream sat in my freezer for months, a frozen reminder of my foolishness in thinking I mattered enough to celebrate. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I'd never done before. I made a list of every dollar I'd given them over the past 8 years. The amount was staggering, more than I had realized, more than Richard and I had ever had at one time in our entire marriage. Enough to buy a new car, to take the cruise we'd always talked about, to fix the leaking roof and replace the ancient furnace that barely heated our apartment. I folded the list carefully and put it in my purse. Not because I planned to show it to anyone, but because I needed proof that what I was feeling was real. I wasn't being dramatic or ungrateful. I was being used, systematically drained by people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a grandmother's face. The discovery of the secret account happened 3 months later, purely by accident. Richard had been complaining of chest pains, and I was searching his desk for our insurance cards when I found the statements. They were hidden beneath old tax returns, as if he was ashamed of what they revealed. I sat in his chair and read every page, my disbelief growing with each transaction. The boat, yes, but so much more. Jewelry, electronics, restaurant charges that exceeded my monthly grocery budget, vacation expenses for trips I'd never heard about. All funded by regular transfers from our joint account, money I thought was going into a retirement fund or emergency savings. Richard knew. He had to know. His signature was on the account opening documents, his name listed as a joint holder. While I worked extra hours and skipped meals, he was helping them hide their spending from me. My own husband had betrayed me as thoroughly as my son and daughter-in-law. Confronting him should have been the hardest part, but by then I was beyond anger, beyond hurt. I felt hollow, emptied out like an old house with the furniture removed. He denied it at first, claiming he didn't remember signing the papers, suggesting that Lauren must have forged his name. You know how persuasive she can be, he said, not meeting my eyes. She probably convinced me it was some kind of investment. But the statements went back years. This wasn't a single moment of weakness or confusion. This was a sustained deception, a carefully planned strategy to separate me from my money while keeping me emotionally invested in their lives. How long? I asked him. How long have you known what they were doing? He couldn't answer. Or wouldn't. He just sat there in his recliner, the one I'd bought him for his retirement, looking like the old man he'd become. When had we both gotten so old? When had we stopped being partners and become co-conspirators in our own destruction? That night, I called the bank and froze all the accounts. Every credit card, every automatic transfer, every line of credit they'd established using our good name and credit history. The representative was professional but curious, asking if there had been any fraudulent activity. Yes, I said simply. There has been fraud. I should have felt satisfied, empowered by finally taking control. Instead, I felt terrified. What would happen now? Would Michael cut me out of his life completely? Would I ever see Emma and Jake again? Was I being selfish and vindictive, or was I finally learning to protect myself? The phone started ringing at 7 the next morning. First Michael, his voice tight with panic as he explained that his mortgage payment had been rejected. Then Lauren, screaming about embarrassment and family loyalty and how I was ruining their children's future. Then Michael again, this time angry instead of panicked, accusing me of being manipulative and cruel. I listened to their voicemails but didn't answer the calls. I wasn't ready to defend myself, wasn't sure I could without breaking down completely. For the first time in years, I had a day with no requests for money, no guilt trips about family obligations, no pressure to be anyone other than myself. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I spent that day doing something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping for myself. Not groceries or household necessities, but things I wanted simply because I wanted them. A book I'd been meaning to read. A small potted plant for my kitchen windowsill. A cup of good coffee from the shop down the street. Each purchase felt revolutionary. This money was mine. I had earned it, saved it, protected it. I had the right to spend it on things that brought me joy instead of constantly giving it away to people who took it for granted. The plant was a small red geranium, bright and cheerful against the dreary backdrop of my kitchen. I placed it on the windowsill where the morning light would hit it, imagining how it would look in full bloom. For the first time in months, I had something to look forward to. The confrontation I'd been dreading came 3 days later. Michael and Lauren showed up at my apartment without calling, their faces grim with determination. Emma and Jake weren't with them, which told me everything I needed to know about their strategy. They were here for a business meeting, not a family visit. We need to talk, Lauren announced as she pushed past me into the living room. She looked different somehow, older and more calculating than I remembered. Her designer outfit probably cost more than my monthly social security check, but she wore it like armor, a reminder of the lifestyle she was fighting to protect. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. He stood by the window, looking out at the alley behind our building, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The little boy who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read him stories was gone, replaced by this stranger who saw me only as an obstacle to overcome. You can't just cut us off like this, Lauren continued. We have obligations, responsibilities. The children are counting on us. What about my responsibilities? The words came out before I could stop them, sharper than I intended. What about my obligations to myself? That's selfish, Mom. Michael finally turned to face me, his expression hard. Family takes care of family. That's what you taught me. Had I taught him that? Or had I taught him that taking was acceptable, that other people's sacrifices were his birthright? I looked at my son, this man I'd loved more than my own life, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. I've been taking care of family for 8 years, I said quietly. I've given you over $160,000. That's more money than your father and I ever had at one time. That's money we needed for our own retirement, our own emergencies. Lauren's eyes flashed with anger. No one forced you to give us anything. You offered. You insisted, even when we said we didn't need help. The lie was so blatant, so complete, that I actually laughed. A bitter, ugly sound that seemed to come from someone else's throat. You didn't need help? Then what was the mortgage payment last week? What about the car repair 3 months ago? What about Emma's school tuition and Jake's baseball equipment and your anniversary trip to Mexico? Those were loans, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. We always planned to pay you back. When? I asked. When exactly were you planning to pay me back? After you bought the boat? After you renovated your kitchen again? After you finished spending my retirement on your lifestyle? The silence stretched between us, heavy with truths that had been buried for too long. I could see the calculation in Lauren's eyes, the desperate search for a new angle of attack. If you stop helping us now, we'll lose the house, she said finally. Is that what you want? Your grandchildren living in some apartment, going to public school with kids from broken homes? There it was. The nuclear option. The threat to use my grandchildren as weapons against me. I felt something break inside my chest, a final strand of hope or denial or willful blindness finally snapping. My grandchildren, I repeated slowly. When was the last time I saw them? When was the last time you brought them here for a visit that didn't involve asking for money? Neither of them answered. They didn't need to. We all knew the answer. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, please, Michael started, but I cut him off. Get out of my house. Both of you. And don't come back unless you're prepared to treat me like a human being instead of a bank account. They left without another word, Lauren's heels clicking angrily against the hallway floor. The apartment felt different after they were gone, emptier but also cleaner somehow. Like an infection had been drained, leaving a wound that could finally begin to heal. I sat on my couch for a long time after they left, staring at the geranium on my windowsill. Its bright red petals seemed impossibly cheerful given everything that had just happened. But maybe that was the point. Maybe healing started with small acts of self-care, tiny rebellions against the forces that wanted to diminish you. The next few weeks were the loneliest of my life, but they were also the most honest. No phone calls asking for money. No fake cheerfulness designed to soften me up for the next request. No pretending that giving away everything I had was somehow noble or generous. I started keeping track of my own expenses for the first time in years. Not the money going out, but the money staying in. My medication, my food, my utilities. The basic costs of keeping myself alive and comfortable. It was shocking how little I actually needed, how much of what I'd been spending was pure guilt and manipulation. I also started paying attention to my apartment, really looking at it instead of just existing in it. The wallpaper was faded and peeling in places. The carpet was worn thin in the high-traffic areas. The furniture was decades old and showing its age. This was my home, the place where I was supposed to feel safe and comfortable, and I'd let it deteriorate while sending thousands of dollars to people who lived in luxury. For the first time in years, I made improvements. Small ones, because my budget was still tight, but meaningful ones. New curtains for the living room. A fresh coat of paint in the bathroom. A comfortable reading chair to replace the broken recliner I'd been making do with. Each change felt like a declaration of independence. This was my space, my refuge, my sanctuary. I deserved to live somewhere that reflected my own taste and priorities, not just the bare minimum required for survival. I also reached out to my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived in the apartment next door. We'd been polite acquaintances for years, exchanging pleasantries in the hallway and occasionally helping each other with packages. But I'd never made the effort to really get to know her, partly because I'd been too busy managing my family's crises and partly because I'd forgotten how to be a friend. Maria Rodriguez was 78 years old, a widow who'd raised 4 children and now lived alone like me. But unlike me, she seemed to have mastered the art of contentment. Her apartment was small but beautifully decorated with photographs and plants and handmade crafts. She invited me for coffee one afternoon, and I was amazed by how peaceful her space felt. The secret, she told me as we sat at her kitchen table, is to love what you have instead of worrying about what you don't have. It sounded simple, almost naive, but as I looked around her cozy apartment and saw the genuine warmth in her eyes, I realized she was right. Contentment wasn't about having more. It was about appreciating what was already there. We started having coffee together twice a week, then 3 times, then almost daily. Maria introduced me to her other friends, a small group of women who met regularly to play cards and share gossip and support each other through the challenges of aging. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a community, to have people who cared about my well-being without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after my confrontation with Michael and Lauren, Maria asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Do you miss them?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. Did I miss them? I missed the grandchildren, certainly. I missed the idea of having family close by, people who cared about me and included me in their lives. But did I miss the actual relationship we'd had? The constant stress, the financial pressure, the feeling of never being good enough or generous enough? I miss who I thought they were, I said finally. I don't miss who they actually turned out to be. Maria nodded as if this made perfect sense. Sometimes love means letting go of people who don't know how to love you back. The wisdom in her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent so much time trying to buy their love, trying to prove my worth through sacrifice and generosity, that I'd never stopped to ask whether they were capable of loving me for who I was instead of what I could provide. That night, I did something I should have done years earlier. I wrote a letter to Michael, not to argue or accuse, but to explain. I told him about the woman I used to be before I became his personal ATM. I told him about my dreams, my interests, my struggles. I told him about the life I'd given up to support his choices, and the life I was trying to build for myself now. I never sent the letter. Writing it was enough. It helped me remember who I was beyond my role as mother and grandmother and wife. I was Margaret, a woman with her own thoughts and feelings and needs. I was someone worth protecting and defending, even if I had to do it myself. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, a new routine emerged. I woke up each morning without dreading the phone or checking my accounts for signs of unauthorized access. I made plans that extended beyond the next crisis or emergency. I bought a small television for my bedroom and watched old movies late into the night, something I'd never allowed myself to do when I was worried about disturbing Richard. Richard had grown more distant since my confrontation with Michael and Lauren, spending most of his time in his chair watching sports or sleeping. We spoke less and less, our conversations reduced to practical matters like grocery lists and medical appointments. I felt sad about the deterioration of our marriage, but I also felt relief. For the first time in decades, I wasn't responsible for managing his emotions or protecting him from difficult truths. One evening in early spring, about 4 months after I'd blocked their access to our accounts, the phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the caller ID, and I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. But instead of panic or guilt, I felt something like curiosity. What did he want now? How would he approach me after months of silence? "Hi, Mom." His voice was different, quieter than I remembered. I was wondering if we could talk. "We're talking now," I said carefully. "I mean in person. Could I come over?" I looked around my apartment, taking in the new curtains and the thriving geranium and the stack of library books on my coffee table. This was my space now, my sanctuary. Did I want to let him into it? "Just you?" I asked. "Just me." An hour later, he was sitting on my couch, looking uncomfortable and out of place. He'd lost weight, I noticed, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked older, more like his father, but also somehow smaller than I remembered. "Lauren and I are getting divorced," he said without preamble. I waited for him to continue, fighting the urge to comfort him or take responsibility for his problems. This was information, not a request for help. I could listen without feeling obligated to fix anything. "She's been having an affair," he continued. "With her personal trainer. It's been going on for over a year." The betrayal in his voice was familiar, an echo of what I'd felt when I discovered their deception. But I also heard something else, surprise. As if he truly hadn't seen it coming, hadn't recognized the signs of someone using him for their own purposes. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not sorry that his marriage was ending, but sorry that he was experiencing the same pain I'd lived with for years. "She's trying to take everything," he said. "The house, the kids, even the boat. Her lawyer says she deserves it because she gave up her career to raise the children." "What career?" I wanted to ask. Lauren had worked part-time at a boutique for 6 months after college before deciding that traditional employment was beneath her ambitions. But I kept my thoughts to myself. "I need help, Mom." Not money, he added quickly, seeing my expression. Just advice. You've been through a divorce before, when you and Dad split up that first time. How did you get through it? I thought about those years, the early 70s when Michael was just a toddler and I was trying to navigate single parenthood while working full-time. It had been terrifying and exhausting, but also liberating in ways I'd almost forgotten. I learned to depend on myself, I said simply. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, and that I could survive without someone who didn't appreciate what I brought to their life. He nodded slowly, as if considering this for the first time. I keep thinking about all the money we took from you and Dad. Lauren spent most of it on things that don't matter now. Clothes, jewelry, restaurant meals. It's all gone, and I don't have anything to show for it. There was shame in his voice, genuine remorse that I'd never heard before. But I wasn't ready to absolve him, wasn't prepared to pretend that his regret erased years of manipulation and neglect. The money is gone, I agreed. But that's not the worst part for me. What's the worst part? I felt invisible to you. Like I only mattered when you needed something. Like I wasn't a real person with my own dreams and problems and feelings. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded in his lap. When he looked up, his eyes were wet with tears I'd never seen him shed. I became someone I don't recognize, he said. Someone who would take advantage of his own mother. I don't know how to fix that. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of damaged relationships and broken trust. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I forgave him, that we could go back to the way things used to be. But the way things used to be was the problem. You can't fix what's already broken, I said finally. But you can decide to be different going forward. You can decide to treat people like human beings instead of resources. Would you be willing to try again? To have a relationship with me that isn't about money or obligations or anything except just being family? The hope in his voice was painful to hear. This was my son, the little boy I'd loved more than life itself. But he was also the man who'd helped drain my bank account while I ate peanut butter sandwiches and skipped my medication. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to think about what that would look like. And you need to prove to me that you've actually changed, not just that you're sorry you got caught. He nodded, accepting my conditions without argument. Before he left, he asked about the grandchildren, whether there was any chance I'd be willing to see them again. That depends on you, I told him. They're innocent in all this, but I won't be used as a babysitter while you work or as a backup plan when your other arrangements fall through. If you want them to have a relationship with me, it has to be because you think I'm worth knowing, not because I'm convenient. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to process what had just happened. Was this the beginning of a reconciliation, or just another manipulation disguised as remorse? I'd been fooled before by people who told me what I wanted to hear. How could I trust my own judgment when it had failed me so completely in the past? Maria knocked on my door later that evening, bringing homemade soup and her uncanny ability to sense when I needed to talk. I told her about Michael's visit, about his divorce and his apparent regret. She listened without judgment, nodding at appropriate moments but offering no immediate advice. What do you think? I asked when I'd finished the whole story. I think, she said carefully, that people can change. But they have to want to change for themselves, not just because their circumstances have changed. It was a distinction I hadn't considered. Was Michael sorry for how he'd treated me, or was he just sorry that his comfortable lifestyle had collapsed? Time would tell, but I wasn't going to hold my breath waiting for an answer. The next few months brought gradual, cautious contact with Michael. He called occasionally, not to ask for anything but to check on my health and tell me about his job search and the progress of his divorce. The conversations were awkward at first, stilted and formal, like we were strangers getting to know each other. But slowly, something began to shift. He started asking about my life, my interests, the books I was reading and the friends I was making. He seemed genuinely surprised to learn that I had thoughts and opinions beyond my role as his mother. When had we stopped talking about anything except his problems and my solutions? I remained guarded, careful not to offer unsolicited advice or financial assistance. This was his life to navigate, his problems to solve. I could be supportive without being responsible, caring without being controlling. One afternoon in late summer, almost a year after I'd blocked their accounts, he brought Emma and Jake to visit. They were bigger than I remembered, Emma now 8 and Jake 6, both of them shy and uncertain in my presence. I realized with a shock that they barely knew me, that our previous relationship had been built on brief visits and expensive presents rather than genuine connection. We spent the afternoon at the park near my apartment, feeding ducks and playing on the playground equipment. I watched my grandchildren run and laugh and argue with each other, and I felt something I'd almost forgotten, simple joy in their presence, untainted by guilt or obligation or hidden agendas. Can we come back next week? Emma asked as they prepared to leave. If your dad says it's okay, I replied, looking at Michael for confirmation. We'd like that, he said. If you're not too busy. Busy? When was the last time anyone had considered whether I might be too busy for them? It was such a small courtesy, but it meant everything to me. They did come back the next week, and the week after that. Gradually, we developed new traditions. Saturday afternoon visits to the park or the library. Ice cream on hot days, hot chocolate when the weather turned cold. Simple pleasures that didn't cost much but created memories worth keeping. I was careful not to spoil them with expensive gifts or elaborate outings. Instead, I taught them things: how to make paper airplanes, how to identify different types of birds, how to plant seeds in small pots on my windowsill. They needed to know me as a person, not just as a source of treats and entertainment. Michael's divorce was finalized in the fall, messier and more expensive than he'd anticipated. Lauren got the house and primary custody of the children, along with substantial alimony that would strain his reduced income for years to come. He moved into a small apartment across town, taking only his clothes and a few personal items. "I feel like I'm starting over," he told me one evening as we sat in my living room, the children coloring at my kitchen table. "Starting over isn't always a bad thing," I replied. "Sometimes it's the only way to become who you're supposed to be." The holidays that year were different from anything we'd experienced as a family. Instead of elaborate celebrations funded by my credit cards, we had simple gatherings in my small apartment. I cooked modest meals, nothing fancy but made with care. Michael brought sparkling cider and store-bought dessert. The children made decorations from construction paper and glue. It was the first Christmas in years that didn't leave me financially stressed or emotionally drained. We played board games, watched old movies, told stories about Christmases past. The apartment felt full despite its small size, warm despite the winter wind rattling the windows. Richard joined us for Christmas dinner, emerging from his bedroom like a reluctant ghost. He looked older and frilier than ever, but there was something different in his eyes when he watched Michael interact with the children. Pride, maybe. Or regret. It was hard to tell. As the evening wound down and the children grew sleepy, Emma climbed into my lap and asked me to read her a story. It was a picture book she'd brought from her mother's house, something about a lonely tree that learns to appreciate its own shade. As I read, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because everything was perfect or resolved, but because I was finally living authentically. I was a grandmother reading to her granddaughter, nothing more complicated than that. No hidden agendas, no financial obligations, no emotional manipulation. Just love, simple and honest and freely given. The year that followed brought continued healing and growth. Michael found steady work and seemed more confident, more like the man I'd hoped he would become. Our relationship wasn't perfect, still carried scars from years of mutual disappointment, but it was real in a way it had never been before. I continued my friendship with Maria and her circle of women, finding joy in simple social connections. We played cards, shared meals, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. I learned that I was funny when I wasn't worried about money, that I had opinions worth sharing when I wasn't focused entirely on other people's problems. I also started volunteering at a local literacy program, teaching adults to read. Many of my students were immigrants or people who'd fallen through the cracks of the education system. They approached learning with humility and determination that reminded me of my younger self, when everything seemed possible if you were willing to work hard enough. Working with them taught me something important: everyone deserves dignity, regardless of their circumstances. Everyone has value beyond what they can provide to others. It was a lesson I'd taught them, but they taught it back to me in ways I hadn't expected. My relationship with Richard remained complicated. We lived in the same space but led increasingly separate lives. Sometimes I wondered if we were staying together out of habit or financial necessity rather than love. But we were both old and set in our ways, and change felt more daunting than acceptance. One evening in late spring, as I was watering my geranium and watching the sunset paint the alley behind our building in shades of gold and pink, the phone rang. It was Michael, calling from the hospital. "Dad had a heart attack," he said, his voice tight with worry. "They're doing surgery now, but it doesn't look good." I grabbed my purse and shoes, my hands shaking as I tried to process what he'd told me. Richard was 75 years old, had been having chest pains for months, but somehow I'd thought we had more time. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Michael was there with Emma and Jake, their faces solemn and confused. I sat beside my son and held his hand, offering the comfort I could give without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Richard survived the surgery but barely. The damage to his heart was extensive, the recovery uncertain. For weeks, I divided my time between the hospital and home, learning to navigate a new kind of worry. But something unexpected happened during those long days and nights at his bedside. We talked more than we had in years, sharing memories and regrets with the honesty that sometimes comes when time is running short. "I'm sorry about the money," he said one afternoon when he was feeling stronger. "I should have protected you instead of helping them take advantage." "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if we said no, they'd cut us out completely. I thought it was better to be used than to be alone. I understood that fear, had lived with it myself for years. The terror of abandonment, of being forgotten, of dying without anyone to mourn your passing. But I'd learned that being used wasn't better than being alone. It was just a different kind of loneliness, one that slowly eroded your sense of self-worth until you forgot you had any value beyond what you could provide. Richard recovered slowly, coming home from the hospital weaker but somehow more present than he'd been in years. His brush with mortality had shaken him out of the depression that had consumed him, reminding him that life was finite and precious. We began taking short walks in the evening, nothing strenuous but enough to get us both moving. He started helping with dinner again, chopping vegetables while I cooked, sharing stories about his day or memories from our early years together. It wasn't a complete transformation. We were still two old people with decades of accumulated disappointments and compromises. But we were also two people who had survived together, who had raised a son and built a life despite all the obstacles that had tried to defeat us. The second year after my financial rebellion brought new challenges and unexpected joys. Emma started staying overnight occasionally, sleeping on an air mattress in my living room and helping me make breakfast in the morning. Jake was still too young for overnights, but he visited regularly, his energy and enthusiasm filling my small apartment with laughter. I cherished these visits in ways I never had before. Without the pressure of being their financial provider, I could simply be their grandmother. I could focus on getting to know them as individuals, learning about their interests and personalities and dreams. Emma loved to draw, filling notebook after notebook with elaborate pictures of animals and princesses and space adventures. I bought her art supplies with money I would have once sent to her parents, watching her face light up as she experimented with different colors and techniques. Jake was fascinated by how things worked, constantly taking apart toys and household items to see their inner mechanisms. Instead of scolding him for making messes, I started saving interesting objects for him to examine: old clocks, broken radios, discarded electronics. His curiosity reminded me of Michael at that age, before life had taught him to value security over wonder. Michael and I continued rebuilding our relationship, but progress was slower than either of us had hoped. Too much damage had been done, too much trust had been broken. We were like two people learning to walk again after a serious injury, taking tentative steps and trying not to fall. But there were moments of genuine connection, glimpses of who we might have been to each other under different circumstances. When he listened to my stories without trying to change the subject. When he asked for my advice because he valued my opinion, not because he was desperate enough to take help from anyone. One afternoon, he brought me a small cactus in a decorative pot, explaining that he'd remembered how much I enjoyed having plants around. "I know it's not much," he said, almost apologetically. "It's perfect," I told him, and I meant it. Not because the plant was expensive or elaborate, but because it meant he'd been thinking about me when he wasn't asking for anything. These small gestures meant more to me than any of the grand promises he'd made in the past. They were proof that I existed in his mind as a person with preferences and interests, not just as a resource to be tapped when needed. My friendship with Maria and her circle continued to deepen and evolve. We celebrated each other's milestones and supported each other through difficulties. When Maria's arthritis flared up, I helped with her grocery shopping. When I was dealing with Richard's health crisis, they organized meal deliveries and offered emotional support. It was the kind of reciprocal relationship I'd never experienced with my own family, where giving and receiving felt natural and balanced. No one kept score, no one felt taken advantage of, and no one had to buy affection with money or favors. Through them, I learned about community resources I'd never known existed: senior discount programs, free health screenings, social clubs, and activity groups. I'd been so focused on my family's needs that I'd never investigated what was available to help with my own. I started taking a water aerobics class at the local community center, something I would never have done when I was worried about the cost and guilty about spending money on myself. The exercise helped with my arthritis and gave me energy I hadn't felt in years. More importantly, it connected me with other women my age who were dealing with similar challenges. We shared stories and strategies, complaints and victories. I realized that my experiences with family manipulation weren't unique, that many women my age had been financially and emotionally exploited by the people they loved most. But I also met women who had set healthy boundaries from the beginning, who had maintained their independence and self-respect while still being loving mothers and grandmothers. Their examples showed me that my choices hadn't been between being generous and being selfish. There had always been a middle ground, a way to help without harming myself. The third anniversary of my financial rebellion passed quietly. I marked it not as a celebration but as a moment of reflection, thinking about how much my life had changed and how much I had learned about myself. I was no longer afraid of being alone. Solitude had become my friend rather than my enemy, a space where I could think clearly and make decisions based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. I was no longer afraid of being selfish. I had learned the difference between selfishness and self-care, between being generous and being exploited. Taking care of my own needs wasn't a moral failing, it was a prerequisite for being able to genuinely care for others. Most importantly, I was no longer afraid of my own worth. I didn't need to buy affection or earn love through sacrifice. I was valuable simply because I existed, because I was a human being with dignity and rights and feelings that mattered. That spring brought an unexpected visit from Lauren, my first contact with her since our confrontation 3 years earlier. She appeared at my door one afternoon looking thinner and older, her designer clothes replaced by something more practical and worn. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I invited her in, curious about what she wanted but no longer afraid of what she might demand. The power dynamics between us had shifted so completely that I felt almost sorry for her. She sat on my couch, looking around my apartment with obvious surprise. The improvements I'd made were modest but meaningful: fresh paint, comfortable furniture, thriving plants, photographs of people who actually mattered to me. "You look good," she said, and there was something like envy in her voice. "Happier." I didn't respond immediately. This conversation was her idea, she could carry it. "Michael told me about your visits with the kids," she continued. "They talk about you all the time now. About the things you teach them, the projects you work on together." Again, I waited. She was building up to something, and I wanted to hear what it was before I said anything that might give her an opening to manipulate me. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "A lot of mistakes. I took advantage of your generosity, and I convinced Michael to do the same thing. I thought it was smart, practical. You had money and we needed it, so why not?" Why not, indeed? I could think of several reasons, but I kept them to myself. "I want to apologize," she continued. "Not because I want anything from you, but because I need to say it. You deserved better from us. You deserved respect and honesty and gratitude, and we gave you none of those things." Her apology sounded rehearsed, like something she'd practiced in front of a mirror. But there was genuine pain in her eyes, the pain of someone who had lost everything and was finally taking responsibility for her choices. "I accept your apology," I said simply. She looked surprised, as if she'd expected me to argue or demand more elaborate expressions of remorse. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it. I don't forgive you, not yet, but I accept your apology." We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us processing this exchange. Finally, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Is there any chance we could start over? Not with money or anything like that. Just as family. The kids miss having you in their lives on a regular basis." I considered her request carefully. Did I believe her remorse was genuine? Did I think she was capable of change? Did I want to risk being hurt again by someone who had already demonstrated her willingness to exploit my love? "I don't know," I said honestly. "A lot of damage was done, Lauren. A lot of trust was broken. I'm not sure it can be repaired." She nodded, accepting my uncertainty without argument. It was the first mature response I'd ever seen from her, the first time she'd acknowledged consequences without trying to manipulate her way around them. "If you ever decide you're willing to try," she said as she prepared to leave, "I'll be here. I'll wait as long as it takes." After she left, I thought about forgiveness and second chances and the complicated nature of family relationships. Lauren had hurt me deeply, had participated in a pattern of exploitation that nearly destroyed my financial security and emotional well-being. But she was also the mother of my grandchildren, a young woman who had made terrible choices but might be capable of learning from them. I wasn't ready to trust her again, might never be ready. But I was no longer consumed by anger toward her either. She had become irrelevant to my happiness, her approval or disapproval no longer capable of affecting my self-worth. That summer, I did something I'd been dreaming about for years. I took a trip. Nothing elaborate or expensive, just a week at a small cabin on a lake in Wisconsin. Maria and 2 other friends came with me, and we spent our days reading and talking and walking along the shore. It was my first real vacation in over a decade, the first time I'd spent money purely for pleasure without feeling guilty about it. I brought books I'd been meaning to read, tried foods I'd never tasted, stayed up late looking at stars I never saw in the city. The trip cost less than I used to send Michael and Lauren in a single month, but it gave me more genuine happiness than years of financial sacrifice had ever provided. I returned home refreshed and confident, more convinced than ever that I deserved to live a life that brought me joy. Richard noticed the change in me immediately. I was more energetic, more talkative, more interested in planning activities and making improvements to our apartment. For the first time since his heart attack, he seemed genuinely curious about my day-to-day experience. "You seem different," he said one evening as we sat on our small balcony, watching the sun set over the lake. I feel different, I admitted. Lighter somehow. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. For standing up for yourself. For refusing to let them drain you dry. It was the first time he'd acknowledged what had happened, the first time he'd taken my side instead of remaining neutral. His words meant more to me than any expensive gift or elaborate gesture could have. That fall, Michael met someone new, a divorce teacher named Sarah who had 2 young children of her own. He was careful not to rush into anything serious, still burned by his experience with Lauren and wary of making the same mistakes. When he finally introduced her to me, I was struck by how different she was from Lauren. Quiet where Lauren had been loud, modest where Lauren had been extravagant, genuinely interested in other people where Lauren had been self-absorbed. Sarah worked full-time and supported herself and her children without drama or crisis. She drove an older car, shopped at discount stores, and seemed genuinely grateful for what she had rather than constantly wanting more. She's not like Lauren, Michael told me after their first visit. She doesn't expect me to solve all her problems or buy her expensive things. She just wants to build something real together. I could see the relief in his face, the freedom that came from being with someone who valued him for himself rather than what he could provide. It reminded me of how I felt now that I was no longer being exploited by people I loved. My relationship with Emma and Jake continued to flourish and deepen. Emma was now 10 and had become my regular companion for weekend art projects and museum visits. Jake, at 8, had discovered a passion for cooking and spent Saturday mornings in my kitchen learning to make pancakes and scrambled eggs. They knew nothing about the financial arrangements that had once dominated their family's relationship with me. To them, I was simply Grandma Margaret, the woman who listened to their stories and helped with their homework and remembered what they liked and didn't like. Sometimes I wondered what they would think when they were older, when they learned about the years I'd spent funding their parents' lifestyle. Would they understand that I'd been struggling too? Would they appreciate the sacrifices I'd made, or would they take them for granted the way their parents had? But most of the time, I didn't worry about it. I was building genuine relationships with them now, based on mutual affection rather than financial obligation. Whatever they thought about the past, they would know that their grandmother loved them enough to demand better treatment for herself and, by extension, for them. The 4th year after my rebellion brought unexpected news, Richard had been offered a part-time consulting job with his old construction company. Nothing strenuous or demanding, just drawing on his decades of experience to help with project planning and problem solving. At first, I was worried about his health, afraid that the stress might trigger another heart attack. But his doctor cleared him for light work, and Richard seemed energized by the prospect of being useful again. I forgot how much I missed having something important to do, he told me after his first week back. Something that mattered beyond just keeping myself entertained. The additional income was welcome but not essential. We'd learn to live on less, to distinguish between needs and wants, to find satisfaction in simple pleasures. The money gave us more security and flexibility, but it didn't fundamentally change our daily lives. What changed was Richard's sense of purpose and self-worth. He stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, took more interest in our shared activities. It was as if returning to work had reminded him that he was still a person with skills and knowledge and value beyond his role as patient or pensioner. That spring, Michael asked if I would be willing to attend his wedding to Sarah. It would be a small ceremony, immediate family only, in a park near their apartment. No elaborate reception or expensive gifts, just a simple celebration of their commitment to each other. I said yes, despite some lingering reservations about getting too involved in his life again. Sarah was different from Lauren, but Michael was still the same man who had taken advantage of my generosity for years. I wanted to support their happiness without making myself vulnerable to renewed exploitation. The wedding was everything Lauren's hadn't been: modest, genuine, focused on the couple's love rather than on displaying wealth or status. Emma and Jake served as witnesses, looking proud and happy to be part of their father's new beginning. I watched Michael speak his vows to Sarah and saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years: peace. Not the desperate confidence he'd tried to project during his marriage to Lauren, but actual contentment. He looked like a man who had finally learned the difference between success and happiness. After the ceremony, we had a small dinner at a restaurant Sarah had chosen, nothing fancy but comfortable and welcoming. She and Michael paid for their own meal, insisted on treating their guests but didn't expect anyone else to contribute to costs they had chosen to incur. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything to me. This was how healthy adults behaved, how people with self-respect and consideration for others handled financial responsibilities. They didn't expect their parents to fund their choices or subsidize their lifestyle. As the evening wound down, Sarah pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that I appreciate what you did for Michael and the kids all those years. He's told me about the sacrifices you made, the money you sent, the support you provided." I braced myself for the request I was sure was coming, the subtle suggestion that such generosity might be welcomed again under the right circumstances. Instead, she said, he's also told me how that affected you, how you were taken advantage of and made to feel guilty for having needs of your own. I want you to know that will never happen again, not while I'm around. Her words were so unexpected, so directly contrary to what I'd experienced with Lauren, that I felt tears spring to my eyes. Someone was actually acknowledging my sacrifice without trying to leverage it for their own benefit. Michael has learned some hard lessons, she continued. About respect and reciprocity and treating people like human beings instead of resources. I don't think he'll make the same mistakes again, but if he does, you have my permission to tell him to take a long walk off a short pier. I laughed despite myself, charmed by her directness and her obvious commitment to fairness. Maybe second chances were possible after all, under the right circumstances with the right people. That summer marked 5 years since I'd blocked their access to my accounts, 5 years since I'd begun the long journey toward reclaiming my life and dignity. I celebrated quietly, taking myself out for a nice dinner and buying a small piece of jewelry I'd been admiring in a shop window. The woman I saw reflected in store windows now was different from the hunched, worried creature I'd been before. My shoulders were straight, my expression calm, my clothes chosen for comfort and personal taste rather than thrift and invisibility. I still lived in the same apartment, still had the same basic routine, still faced the same challenges of aging and limited income. But everything felt different because I felt different. I was no longer a victim of other people's selfishness and manipulation. I was a woman who had learned to value herself and demand better treatment from the people in her life. Maria and I were walking by the lake one evening, enjoying the cool breeze and the sight of sailboats dotting the horizon, when she asked me a question that made me stop and think. Do you ever regret it? Standing up for yourself the way you did? I considered her question carefully, thinking about everything I'd lost and gained in the past 5 years. The money was gone, would never be recovered. My relationship with Michael was rebuilt but would never be the same. I would probably never have a close relationship with Lauren, would always be somewhat guarded around her. But I'd gained so much more than I'd lost. Self-respect. Genuine friendships. A sense of peace and contentment I'd never experienced while I was being exploited. The freedom to make choices based on my own values rather than other people's demands. No, I said finally. I don't regret it at all. The only thing I regret is waiting so long to do it. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, two old women who had learned the hard way that love shouldn't come at the expense of self-respect, that generosity shouldn't be confused with exploitation. As we turned back toward home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey I'd traveled. Not gratitude for the pain and betrayal that had forced me to change, but gratitude for the strength I'd discovered that brings me to today, 6 years after that terrible morning when Lauren's screams about the blocked account shattered my world and rebuilt it at the same time. I sit in my apartment now, the same apartment but transformed by small improvements and genuine care. The geranium on my windowsill has multiplied into several plants, their red blooms brightening even the grayest Chicago days. Richard is napping in his chair, exhausted but content after a morning spent with Jake building a model airplane. Emma is at my kitchen table, working on a watercolor painting while she tells me about her school friends and her dreams of becoming an artist someday. Michael and Sarah are expecting a baby in the spring, their first child together. When Michael told me the news, his eyes were bright with joy and hope, not the desperate calculation I'd seen so often during his marriage to Lauren. They've asked me to be involved as a grandmother, but they've also made it clear that they expect to handle their responsibilities themselves. I look at my life now and marvel at its richness and simplicity. I have enough money to meet my needs and some of my wants. I have genuine friendships based on mutual respect and reciprocity. I have family relationships that bring me joy rather than stress. Most importantly, I have myself. At 78 years old, I finally know who I am beyond my roles as wife, mother, and grandmother. I'm a woman who values justice and kindness, who believes in setting boundaries and maintaining dignity, who has learned that saying no to exploitation is the same thing as saying yes to love. The phone still rings sometimes with requests for help, not just from my family but from other people who've heard I'm generous. But I've learned to listen carefully to these requests, to distinguish between genuine need and entitled demand, between temporary assistance and permanent enabling. I help when I can and want to, but I never again sacrifice my own well-being for someone else's convenience. I've learned that true generosity comes from abundance, not depletion, and that I can't give what I don't have. Some people have criticized my choices, called me selfish or unloving or cold. Usually these are people who benefited from my old pattern of self-sacrifice, who miss having access to my resources without reciprocal obligation. But the people who truly matter, the people who see me as a complete human being rather than just a source of support, understand what I've done and why. They respect my boundaries because they respect me as a person. I think about Lauren sometimes, wonder how she's adjusting to her new reality of actually having to support herself and her children. The last I heard, she was working full-time and living in a modest apartment, learning the same lessons about money management that most people learn in their 20s. I don't wish her ill, but I don't feel sorry for her either. She's experiencing the natural consequences of her choices, the accountability that I shielded her from for too many years. Maybe it will teach her what I finally learned, that dignity and self-respect are worth more than money, and that healthy relationships require mutual consideration. The sunset is painting my windows golden pink now, signaling the end of another ordinary, beautiful day. In a few hours, Michael and Sarah will come to pick up the children, and we'll all share dinner together. Nothing fancy, just leftovers and conversation and the comfortable intimacy of people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Later tonight, I'll read before bed, maybe watch an old movie or call one of my friends. I'll take my medications without rationing them, check my bank balance without fear, plan tomorrow's activities based on what I want to do rather than what other people expect from me. It's a quiet life, perhaps unremarkable to outside observers. But to me, it feels like a miracle. I am finally living for myself while still being connected to the people I love. I am generous without being exploited, caring without being consumed, loving without losing myself. This morning, 6 years ago, I thought my world was ending when I discovered their deception and made the terrifying decision to say no. I thought I was choosing loneliness over love, isolation over family. Instead, I was choosing authenticity over performance, self-respect over martyrdom, genuine love over purchased affection. I was choosing to become the person I was always meant to be, the person who got buried under decades of other people's expectations and demands. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're wondering whether you have the right to say no to people who claim to love you while treating you like an ATM, let me tell you something, you do have that right. You have the right to be treated with respect and consideration. You have the right to set boundaries and maintain your dignity. It won't be easy. The people who benefit from your self-sacrifice will fight your efforts to change, will use guilt and manipulation and emotional blackmail to try to return you to your former role. They'll tell you you're being selfish, ungrateful, cold-hearted. But you'll know better. You'll know that true love doesn't require the destruction of one person for the benefit of another. You'll know that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and reciprocity, not exploitation disguised as need. You'll know that you matter, not just for what you can provide but for who you are, a human being worthy of dignity and consideration and genuine affection. Have you lived something like this? Do you know someone who has sacrificed themselves until there was nothing left to give? Share your story in the comments below, because healing often begins with acknowledging that we're not alone in our struggles. And if this story touched your heart, if it helped you feel less alone or more hopeful about the possibility of change, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these intimate truths, helps me reach other people who need to hear that they deserve better than exploitation disguised as love. Because maybe, just maybe, together we can learn to love ourselves enough to demand the respect we've always deserved. Maybe we can finally understand that saying no to abuse is the same thing as saying yes to life, to dignity, to the possibility of genuine happiness. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for reminding me that my story matters, that my pain wasn't wasted if it can help even one person find the courage to reclaim their own life. The sun has set completely now, and Lake Michigan stretches dark and peaceful beyond my windows. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight, I am exactly where I belong, in my own life, living by my own values, surrounded by people who see me as more than what I can provide them. It took me 73 years to learn that lesson, but it was worth the wait.